Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirkoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my quarterback tier list for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about all 32 starting quarterbacks as I give you guys my perspective and opinions as to how I think the quarterback position currently breaks down. Now, of course, we'll be doing it on a tier list basis, and I'll be giving you guys statistics to justify my decision making, but all of it is for the singular purpose of helping you select the right quarterback and helping you potentially capture a 2021 fantasy football championship, because that's the entire purpose of this channel, and I cannot emphasize that enough. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button down below, join the community, because we're going to be making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season. Of course, besides these tier list videos, the strength of schedule videos will of course have mock drafts, sleepers, must draft players all across the board in the coming days. Starting into the season, of course, we'll begin with rankings at every single position every single week, and then the Sunday morning live streams in order to make sure your lineups are set before kickoff, the weekly waiver wire episodes, and hidden gems. All of that coming down the line for those of you who are interested. And of course, getting an advantage on the rest of your league and capturing a 2021 fantasy football championship. Now, before we begin, another way you can do that and gain an advantage on your league is by getting Andrew Kirkoff's 2021 fantasy football draft guide. You can find that down in the description of the video for those of you who are interested, either on Patreon or my website. I do appreciate it very much. All right, while you're down there in the description, a couple things to note. Of course, we do have a free Discord server for those of you who are interested, and timestamps are down there. So if you're looking for me to talk about a specific player, you can go down to the description of the video, find timestamps, click on the name, and listen accordingly. Now that we've gone ahead and covered that, today's episode will be for a 4-point per passing touchdown format. And now that we've already, pretty much accomplished that, and we're all on the same basis, we can go ahead and begin by talking about the quarterback who honestly deserves to be the number one mentioned guy of the S tier, Patrick Mahomes. He's been the most consistent quarterback since taking the starting job of the Kansas City Chiefs in 2018. In fact, has led all quarterbacks in total touchdowns since then with 120 during the regular season. Throughout that time, he's only played 44 games, but has averaged 24.87 fantasy points per game. Not only has he been able to do it through the air, of course, accomplishing that 50-plus touchdown season in 2018, capturing an NFL MVP, Super Bowl champion. He's a very accomplished quarterback, to say the least. He's been able to find a lot of fantasy stability because of not only his arm, but his legs. He's averaged about 289 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns a season, which continues to just elevate his game as a whole. In terms of his overall production, in the 44 games that he's played thus far in his career, 32 of those games have pretty much been 20-plus fantasy points. That's 72.72% of the time of 20-plus fantasy points. You can't ask for anything more from a quarterback like this. He's obviously got the insane upside of 4-plus per passing touchdown games and relatively not that volatile. I mean, when I went ahead and looked at his statistics over the last 3 years, he has more games of 4-plus touchdowns, which was 11 total, in comparison to games in which he only scored 1 or 0 touchdowns, which is a total of 9. So again, though a lot of people see inconsistency at the quarterback position, not only is Patrick Mahomes majority of the time putting up 20 fantasy points, but he's often putting ahead way more 30, 35-point games than he is with those 15, 14-point mess of a games. So again, Patrick Mahomes, not only has he been consistent, he's surrounded by an incredible offense with 2 all-pro receivers like Kelsey and Tyreek Hill. The Chiefs decided to make it a point of interest to rebolster this offensive line, trading for a left tackle, signing free agents. Patrick Mahomes, the sky is the ceiling. Not only has he been the most consistent, but he kind of gives us the most potential upside for a quarterback to accomplish that number one on a yearly basis, regardless of what's happening. He's just that much more talented and has that much more upside than everybody. That is why he needed to be mentioned first. Our next prospect for today is Josh Allen. Now, of course, Josh Allen needs to be mentioned in the S tier. This is a quarterback that finishes the number one overall QB in 2020. Besides the incredible statistics that he put up last season, he's found a lot of consistency through his career in terms of fantasy. Since 2018, he's averaged 21.84 fantasy points per game in the 42 games as the Buffalo Bills starting quarterback. Now, of course, averaging 21.84 fantasy points per game is incredible, but he hasn't really done that majority of his career through the air. I know he had an incredible 2020 year. Obviously, Stephon Diggs was a major part of helping Josh Allen get to the next level, but his main stability of production has been through the rushing game. I mean, since 2018, he has had at least 400 rushing yards every season and 8 rushing touchdowns every season. In fact, I'll go ahead and just spit them out one at a time. 605 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. 510 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns. 421 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. I mean, he has been unstoppable as pretty much the starting running back of the Buffalo Bills, not only as the starting quarterback who is just diming it out there, throwing lasers on a weekly basis. I mean, just kind of putting it in perspective, in the last 3 seasons, he's had 76 total red zone rushing attempts for 23 rushing touchdowns. Last season in 2020, had 11 attempts inside the 5-yard line for 7 rushing touchdowns. So when everybody wants to talk about Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, we all know Josh Allen is the starting running back of this team, and he'll continue to do so. Now, I talked about consistency with Patrick Mahomes. Of course, Josh Allen hasn't shown as much of that because he's only just recently taken his game to the next level. But in 22 of his 42 career games thus far, he's put up 20 plus fantasy points. That's 52.38% of the time. So at least 50 plus percent of the time thus far in his career, he's been fantastic. But I mean, when we look at last year as an isolated total, I mean, the guy was averaging nearly 25 points per game. He was completely on a tear and just dominating the entire league. So as long as he can continue something moderately close to that, we're happy with, Josh Allen being the second quarterback typically taken off the board. The only concern I ever have with him is the fact that since 2013, there has never been a quarterback that finishes the number 1 in a given season and had a statistical improvement the following year in terms of total fantasy points. There's always been regression. Hopefully the regression isn't as much this upcoming season. And maybe if in fact he wants to break the mold since 2013 and put together a fantastic season, another MVP-esque season, then by all means, go ahead and do so. Help us out in terms of the fantasy landscape. That's Josh Allen. The last quarterback I wanted to mention in the S tier is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray had a legendary season pretty much at the beginning of the year last year. In fact, from weeks 1 through 9, the first 9 games that Kyler Murray played, he was averaging 30.16 fantasy points per game. If he had sustained that for a full 16-game season, he would have finished as the greatest fantasy quarterback performance of all time. I mean, literally all time. I mean, in just the last couple of seasons, we've seen 2 of the greatest fantasy point performances from quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. But Kyler Murray was very capable and close to accomplishing that this last season, but in the second half began to slow down because the rushing totals began to disappear. We'll talk about the rushing totals in a bit, but in his 31 career games, he's averaged 22.07 fantasy points per game. So you can imagine averaging 30 points for 8 games straight has definitely made a difference on his entire career overall. But in terms of his rushing ability, which has kind of been his bread and butter thus far, in his rookie season, he had 544 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. He elevated that in 2020 for 819 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. Of course, I mean, down on the red zone in the goal line situations, he was fantastic. In the last 2 seasons, he's had 41 red zone rushing attempts for 12 rushing touchdowns. I mean, in terms of his statistics alone last year, 147.9 of his fantasy points came from rushing statistics alone. That is unbelievable. He has scored 2+ touchdowns in 64.51% of his games thus far. I mean, Kyler Murray's a stud. He gets A.J. Green. They bring in other wide receivers. They rebolster their offensive line, Rodney Hudson, to center that position and be the leader and captain of that offensive line. Their defense is improved. Kyler Murray could have another great season here, maybe even improve statistically. We move on to our next tier of players, beginning with Dak Prescott. Now, I understand a lot of people may be concerned with Dak Prescott's shoulder, but let's talk about what Dak Prescott has done in his career thus far. Prior to his injury in 2020, every season prior, 2016 to 2019, he has finished as a QB1 in the National Football League in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Finished as the number 6, 10, 12, and number 2 overall quarterback. Again, let's not forget, in 2019, this was a quarterback that was throwing 4,900 passing yards, career highs in a majority of his statistics. In fact, throughout his entire career prior to the injury, has at least put up 28 touchdowns per season. Since 2016, since coming into the league, he's tied 4th in terms of quarterback total touchdowns with 118. I mean, he's been at the top of pretty much every category of play at the quarterback position since coming into the National Football League. And let's not forget, 2016 and 2017 for the Dallas Cowboys, they were running the ball 54% of the time. So they weren't letting Dak completely take over this offense. But now that Mike McCarthy's here, they're getting into more 3 wide receiver sets. They have more talent at the wide receiver position since bringing in Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Blake Jarwin. You've got a lot of talent surrounding this guy. He's got a healthy offensive line this year. I know, again, I understand that the injury concern may instill some fear in you, but let's not forget where this man left off. Last season, in the 4 games as the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, he was averaging 31.3 fantasy points per game. I mean, just looking at the last couple seasons, from 2018 to 2020, in the 36 games that he's played, he's averaged about 21.33 fantasy points per game. Of course, he's accompanied every single one of his seasons thus far with 250 plus rushing yards and about 3 to 6 touchdowns per season. Overall, I just think that Dak Prescott has so much value built in this team, regardless of how their defense is going to play, I think it even helps Dak because majority of the times this Dallas Cowboys defense can't stop a soul. It puts them in negative game scripts, and they're going to have to pass the ball a lot in the second half, and that's exactly where we like to see Dak in an area in which he has to throw in order to make his team that much more viable. And in the fantasy landscape, that's exactly what we're looking for every week of the season. All right, we move on to Russell Wilson as the next quarterback. Similar to Dak Prescott, we're talking about another extremely consistent quarterback. Since becoming the starter of the Seattle Seahawks, Russell Wilson has been a QB1 every single year of his career. On top of that, he's never missed a game in his career due to injury. He's literally just the most consistent quarterback in the last decade of football. And I don't think anybody can really contest that in terms of his overall productivity, being able to find a lot of value on the ground. I mean, just looking in the last 4 to 5 seasons, since 2017, his statistics on the ground speak for themselves. 586 rushing yards, 376, 342, 513, all accompanied by touchdowns on the ground. He's got, a pretty good career thus far. In the last 64 games, he's averaged 21.42 fantasy points per game. In 5 out of the last 6 seasons, he's scored 34 plus touchdowns. What more can you ask for? He's led all quarterbacks in total touchdowns since 2017 with 148. Obviously, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Chris Carson, they bring in Gerald Everett. They bring in a new offensive coordinator. I think the sky's the limit. If they let Russ cook this season, he's going to definitely be able to air it out and have another fantastic fantasy football performance. Justin Herbert's the next quarterback of this tier. Though Justin Herbert has only 1 season under his belt, what he has already shown is very promising. Already surpassing 30 plus touchdowns. You now get a fully healthy Keenan Allen back, Mike Williams back, Austin Eckler back. Again, let's not forget, he didn't have those guys at full capacity for the entire year. He was working with a lot of backups last season. Like his starting running back was Kalen Ballage for the entirety of last season. On top of that, they have significantly improved the offensive line. You spend a first-round pick on Slater. You go bring in Corey Linsley, all-pro center from the Green Bay Packers. You have Brian Bulaga, who's going to be significantly more healthy. Replace your right guard, who was a huge issue last year. In my opinion, they've not only rebolstered the offensive line in order to give him more time, but he has far more talent surrounding him because of the health and the defense, the offensive coordinator. Everything is going to be that much more improved. You bring in Joe Lombardi, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, working under the tutelage of Sean Payton. This is pretty much going to look similar to a Saints offense, in my opinion, where you're targeting the running back a lot, using one, significant wide receiver like a Michael Thomas, whether that ends up being Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. We'll end up seeing, I think it's going to be Keenan Allen, of course. But either way, I think the entire offense surrounding this young man, the fact that he didn't have a full season of preparation last year. I mean, when we looked at last offseason, Tyrod Taylor was getting all the number 1 reps. There wasn't any exposure to Justin Herbert until that game against the Kansas City Chiefs. What was it, week 2? The punctured lung. And then it all took over from there. So now that he's had an entire offseason, new offensive coordinator, learned everything, has the experience and the confidence, Justin Herbert, the sky's the limit. He's another one of these A tiers. The last one I wanted to mention here is Aaron Rodgers. Though he's coming off of a season in which he scored 48 passing touchdowns, of course, 51 touchdowns total. An incredible season nonetheless. What was it, 4,200 passing yards? Those are statistics that you don't often see. And there's a reason why Aaron Rodgers hadn't had a good year like that since 2011. Because those are stats that you really never see in the National Football League. If I'm not mistaken, he had 13 games of 3+ touchdowns last year. The stats just continue to build for Aaron Rodgers in 2020. And despite everything that was surrounding him and all of the offseason controversy with Jordan Love, they're not addressing more receiver options, it didn't matter. He made the players around him successful. He made, Robert Tonyan into a viable fantasy, tight end play, despite the fact that nobody had heard of Robert Tonyan prior to that. So again, we know the talent that Aaron Rodgers has. We know his capabilities. We've seen him year over year accomplish great statistics. If he's going to come out and produce similar numbers to last year, I'm going to be completely surprised because, again, it is extremely rare to do so. When we look at what Aaron Rodgers was accomplishing in 2018 and 2019, if I'm not mistaken, he had just as many touchdowns in 2020 than he did the 2 prior seasons combined. So we've seen a lot of fluctuation in his overall dependability. I think, of course, losing a couple offensive linemen, not having David Bakhtiari immediately there at the left tackle position to begin the season is going to hurt him. But you bring in Randall Cobb, you get more experience there. I think, in my opinion, he should be, prepped for a very good season, but I'm not expecting 50 touchdowns. That's a crazy number that a lot of quarterbacks can't really accomplish. We move on to Lamar Jackson. Now, you may be wondering, Andrew, why do you have Lamar Jackson so low? Let's think about what he's been able to accomplish year over year. He's had back-to-back seasons of 1,000 rushing yards. That in itself obviously is legendary. He's going to go down in the record books. Hopefully, the NFL continues to breed players like this and give us more opportunities of seeing players run the ball as consistently. But Lamar Jackson, as of right now, is one of one. Since coming into the league and taking the starting spot of the Baltimore Ravens in Week 11 of the 2018 season, he's ran away with the job, to say the very least. He's averaged 24.23 fantasy points per game in his 37 starts. And since Week 11, like I mentioned, of the 2018 season, he's been the number one overall quarterback in total fantasy points with 896.62. Now, of course, like I mentioned, back-to-back seasons of 1,000 plus rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Those statistics alone are ginormous. He's pretty much averaging 75 rushing yards a game and half of a rushing touchdown per contest thus far in his career in the last 2 seasons. So as you continue to just pile it up and the statistics build for him, my question is, where is his ceiling? We've seen his ceiling in 2019 where he threw 30 plus, I think it was 36 touchdowns, 1,200 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. So 40 plus touchdowns is probably his ceiling. It's one of the greatest fantasy quarterback performances of all time. But can you accomplish that once again? We're talking about a quarterback that even last year, with 20 plus passing touchdowns, 1,000 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, was like the quarterback 9 overall in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. I don't know if he can get any better than that. I don't even want him to get any better than that. He's been so fantastic in his career thus far that I have a hard time thinking that he could run for more yards or pass for more touchdowns. It's a crazy number. Maybe if they're going to continue to improve the receivers around him year over year, he can take the next step. But as of right now, I think that he's capped at this 1,000 rushing yard, 24 passing touchdown mark, which is going to get him in this range of this A tier among the quarterbacks in this area. And though in a 4-point per passing touchdown format, the ability to run the ball gives you that much more upside, I still think Lamar Jackson has a lot of room to potentially prove me wrong. When we look at his statistics, 25 of his 37 games for 20 plus fantasy points, that's a 68% time with 20 fantasy points. He's had 90 red zone rushing attempts, 20 from inside the 5-yard line, that have led to 13 touchdowns in his career. And against the AFC North, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Browns, and the Cincinnati Bengals, the guys averaged 24.74 fantasy points per game. The statistics are there. Lamar should be fantastic. I got no qualms about that at all. Tom Brady's the next quarterback I wanted to mention. Another quarterback that, of course, is coming off of a fantastic year. 4,600 passing yards, 40 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, threw 12 interceptions. But the 12 interceptions were mainly there because this is a guy that was throwing the ball deep all season long. Bruce Arians, Byron left with which their offenses. We saw it the year prior with Jameis Winston. They want to throw the ball deep. There's a reason why Jameis threw 30 interceptions in 2019 because he was throwing into double coverage without LASIK surgery. He was completely blind. Now you bring in a Hall of Fame GOAT quarterback, and of course, you're going to accomplish a lot. He led the NFL last season in attempts of 20-plus yards and completions of 20-plus yards. He's got the wide receiver core to surround him to accomplish goals like that of getting, potentially even 5,000 passing yards this year, because let's not forget, they started pretty slow last season. From weeks 1 through 9 of the 2020 season, he was only averaging 19.95 fantasy points per game, while from weeks 10 through 17 was averaging 24.34 fantasy points per game. We saw him in the playoffs produce 3 games of 3 passing touchdowns. There's a lot to see from this quarterback. To put into perspective just how rare it is for these performances to continue to rack up for Tom Brady, we've only seen 8 quarterback performances in the past decade that have accomplished 4,200 passing yards and 40 plus passing touchdowns in the last 10 years. So again, we know Brady's one of one. He's going to continue to ball out. He's got a lot of talent around him. Of course, you still got AB, Gronk, Godwin, Evans. You bring in Giovanni Bernard. A lot of talent surrounds him. The offensive line, top 5 in the league. Should be fantastic this upcoming season. Ryan Tannehill is the last quarterback of the B tier. The reason why I wanted to mention Tannehill is because he has been as consistent as anybody in the last 2 seasons. Since he's taken the starting quarterback job of the Tennessee Titans in, week 7 of the 2019 season against the Chargers, he's averaged 22.14 fantasy points per game in the 26 games played. In fact, since then, he's been the number 3 overall quarterback in total fantasy points, only behind Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. These guys have been absolutely incredible. And yes, Ryan Tannehill stands alone because he's in an offense that is far and away a run-heavy offense in which he's not really getting a lot of that running work. Sure, he'll get the rushing touchdowns, but in terms of the rushing ability and the amount of times that they throw the ball, I think they only threw the ball 483 times last year in comparison to other teams. I mean, Pittsburgh threw the ball, 630 times. Tampa Bay threw 626 times. A lot of other teams are getting far more opportunities than Ryan Tannehill, but with what he's been given, he's made a full advantage of it. On top of the fact that, yes, he does get the ability to run the ball. He is an athletic quarterback. Last season, he had 68.6 total fantasy points coming from rushing statistics alone, and he has scored 11 rushing touchdowns in the last 26 games for the Tennessee Titans. And a lot of people may be thinking that statistic is going to see some regression, but again, there's a reason why those statistics are there, because the plays are designed for Ryan Tannehill to read option, keep the ball, and run it down in the red zone, because a lot of people are always focusing on A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry down in the red zone. You add on top of the fact that he has had a good offense surrounding him, Taylor Lewan's coming back at the left tackle position. You add Hall of Famer Julio Jones to the outside. On top of the fact that throughout his career, Ryan Tannehill has averaged 247 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns per game in the last 26 games, with a 76.1% passing completion percentage, adjusted, of course, to eliminating the throwaways and the spikes. I think the sky's the limit for this team. The fact that Ryan Tannehill is being so undervalued despite his incredible consistency, 2+ touchdowns in 24 out of the last 26 games, that's 92.3% of the time. I don't see regression. I only see potential improvement this year. That's why Ryan Tannehill's there. The next quarterback I wanted to mention is Jalen Hurts. And though a lot of people question what his potential is this upcoming season because the Eagles may be a dumpster fire, they might not win that many games, what can we really expect from a quarterback of this caliber without that much shown thus far? What he has shown in his 4 NFL starts is pretty convincing. He's averaged 23.74 fantasy points per game, and he's found a lot of success in the running game. In fact, in those 4 starts, he's accumulated 46 rushing attempts for 272 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Overall, that's 68 rushing yards per game. If you go ahead and you expand that on a 17-game season, there's a very good chance that Jalen Hurts surpasses 1,000 rushing yards this upcoming year, and perhaps even accompanies that kind of yardage with 6, 7, or 8 rushing touchdowns. Now, if we think about if he's capable of doing that in comparison to, of course, talking about Lamar being a 1 of 1, I think he has shown that he can certainly do it already with what he's accomplished in his career in the NFL. But if we go back to his final year at Oklahoma, the guy ran for 1,298 rushing yards and had 20 rushing touchdowns as the starting quarterback. Guys, let's not forget, he's a quarterback, and that's what he did in college his senior year. So again, Jalen Hurts, he's unstoppable in terms of running the ball. That's going to be just pretty much built in. You go ahead, you bring in Devonta Smith. You have Ertz and Goddard as safety blankets. You still have Rieger going into his second year. You've got talent in this offense. This year, they're going to have a completely restructured offensive line because they're healthy finally. You get Lane Johnson back, the all-pro right tackle. You bring in Brandon Brooks because he's back from his Achilles injury, all-pro right guard. A.J. Dillard, their left tackle that they drafted a couple years back, he is back from an ACL injury. They're going to be full systems go. And though I don't think they're going to be winning a lot of games, they're going to be losing a lot of games, which will give Jalen Hurts the ability to throw the ball and run the ball a lot, getting a lot of fantasy value in the second halves of games. That is why I present to you Jalen Hurts at this caliber of quarterback, because he does have a lot of potential for upside in those garbage time moments. We have Matthew Stafford joining Jalen Hurts as the last members of the C tier. Again, I've talked about Matthew Stafford a lot this offseason because, again, I am a Rams fan. But the thing is, if we could see Jared Goff in a Sean McVay offense produce seasons of 32 passing touchdowns, 28 passing touchdowns, accompanied with 4,600 passing yards, then what can we really expect from a guy like Matthew Stafford, a real gunslinger, a quarterback that, in all accounts is significantly better throwing the ball, decision-making wise? You can go ahead and expand this offense. You can give Matthew Stafford and the quarterback position of the Rams that much more responsibility. He's going from an offense that his best receiver was Marvin Jones, Amendola, Quintez Cephas, and now you're joining the likes of Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Deshaun Jackson. You bring in a lot of young receiving talent, a better offensive line, a significantly better defense, so he's not always in a toxic pattern of having to come out and have to score every single time he's out. They can run the ball effectively. They can use play action. They can allow Matthew Stafford to sit in the pocket comfortably, which he hasn't been able to do in Detroit. Again, they haven't run the ball in Detroit in so many years that, all they've done is pretty much run shotgun four wide, and just let him throw. And yes, they found a lot of success in that. In fact, Matthew Stafford last year, he was the number 15 overall quarterback in fantasy, throwing for 4,084 yards and 26 passing touchdowns, only 10 interceptions. Again, if we can see Jared Goff put us those numbers in LA, and we can see kind of similar numbers from Matthew Stafford in Detroit, when you kind of swap the roles, I think we're going to see a lot of success from Matthew Stafford here. He's going to be a fantastic quarterback play, and that's why he closes out the C tier. All right, we have Matt Ryan as the D tier quarterback. Now, here's the thing about Matt Ryan. We know he is an accomplished quarterback. He typically is pretty much at the back end of the top 12 on a yearly consistent basis. And though in the last couple of years he's been pretty much subpar in terms of his overall productivity, putting up 26 passing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons, I think changing offensive coordinators and head coach and changing the entire regime of this team from Dirk Cutter to Arthur Smith is going to make a huge difference in the overall productiveness of Matt Ryan. And yes, you lose Julio Jones, but you still have Calvin Ridley. You bring in Kyle Pitts. He's practically a wide receiver at that. You go ahead, you improve the backfield by bringing in Mike Davis. I mean, yes, their offense is not going to be the best in the league. They don't have the most talent. And with that being the case, I'm still not bothered by it because I think Matt Ryan year over year has been a consistent quarterback, 3+ years of putting up 25+ passing touchdowns. A lot of other quarterbacks have not been able to accomplish it, on top of the fact that their defense isn't that good. And when they're down in games, they're going to throw the ball. And yes, having the ability to at least run it early in games, kind of threaten the potential of play action, will open up a lot for Matt Ryan, which again, similar to Matthew Stafford, they have not seen in their careers as of late. They have been in a lot of negative game script scenarios in which they've had to, pretty much throw the ball and run for their lives in many of these cases. I think Matt Ryan with Arthur Smith, regardless of the absence of Julio, is going to be an upgrade for him this year. And though he is pretty much finished as the number 11, 12, 13 overall quarterback in the last couple of years, that's pretty much where I see him in that kind of range this upcoming season. The next quarterback is Kirk Cousins. Very similar to Matt Ryan, but I think Kirk Cousins has been even more successful as of late, but a lot of people don't want to give him the credit for it. I'm just going to go ahead and read some stats. In the last 6 seasons, the amount of passing touchdowns this man has scored: 29, 25, 27, 30, 26, 35. He's coming off of a year with 36 total touchdowns and 4,265 passing yards for the Minnesota Vikings. Look, Kirk Cousins, he may not be the sexiest of quarterbacks. He may not be a top 12 guy every single week, but he is certainly a quarterback that you can have on your bench or bring him in on fantastic matchups, especially against the Detroit Lions every single year, and find a lot of success there. Again, with the receiving options that he has, Adam Thielen, Irv Smith, of course, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook out of the backfield, this offense continues to score a lot of points. That's not been their issue in any sort of capacity. Their defense has been the problem, and we love to see that in fantasy football, because when in fact the Minnesota Vikings are giving up the second most points in the National Football League in 2020, of course that's going to force Kirk Cousins to throw the ball a lot and find a lot of success in doing so, because he is a natural thrower. There's a reason why Kyle Shanahan wanted to get Kirk Cousins instead of Jimmy Garoppolo a couple years back, because he had the comfort of him back in Washington. They wanted to bring him in and pretty much solidify him as the 49ers quarterback. Obviously gets signed to the Minnesota Vikings, screws up those plans, but we know that he can throw the ball consistently. He has the ability to be mobile using his legs. So again, I think Kirk Cousins, a fantastic option, and though he isn't the most appealing play on a given basis, he has found a lot of consistency year over year, has been within that top 15 quarterback conversation every single year in the last 3 seasons in fantasy football. So again, we mentioned him here. Another quarterback that again is a pocket passer but doesn't get a lot of respect. Ben Roethlisberger, in the last 2 seasons as the full starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2018 and 2020, he has thrown for over 30 touchdowns in both those seasons, has had record-breaking amount of passing attempts in comparison to the rest of his career. Now you get Najee Harris. The offensive line has been reshuffled a bit. Maybe they're going to run the ball more. I mean, they've got the easiest strength of schedule in terms of running the ball. I think this could open up a little bit of help for Ben Roethlisberger as a whole. I mean, when I look at what he has done in the past couple seasons, last year, his average depth of target went down significantly, and he only threw for 3,800 total yards. But again, he was coming off of that elbow injury from the year prior. He had surgery, was still trying to kind of return back from that. I mean, there was a lot of things that were holding back Ben Roethlisberger last year. I think this upcoming season, we could see a more improved Ben Roethlisberger, a guy that's certainly on track to throw for 4,000 passing yards and at least 30 passing touchdowns. And with that, can get himself in some good matchups, 3+ touchdowns, 250 yards, and a fantastic fantasy play, even if he's not your starter on a bye week or as a streaming option. We move on to Ryan Fitzpatrick, or Ryan Fitzmagic. Earlier today, he was officially named the starting quarterback of the Washington football team. That's fine. Good for him. That's great. We already knew that was going to happen. Ryan Fitzmagic has been a fantastic quarterback. I mean, in the last couple of years for either the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Miami Dolphins, it doesn't really matter. He has been a fantastic quarterback. In fact, in 2019, from weeks 7 through 17, the guy was averaging like 22 fantasy points per game. He's just been able to do it all regardless of what's surrounded him. Going to Washington, in my opinion, is a huge upgrade. You have a significantly better running game with the offensive line and the backfield. You have significantly better receiving options than in comparison to Miami a couple years back with Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, even Adam Humphrey sitting in the slot position. There's a lot of value to be had in this offense. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick, though sometimes he makes huge mistakes, it is not going to burn you in fantasy football. He's going to score far more touchdowns than he is interceptions, though sometimes he is prone to throwing 4+ in a singular game. I'm not concerned about it. I think those days are behind him. He's going to be used as a game manager of sorts, but again, he has shown tendencies of wanting to run the ball. He's not afraid of making contact, running over linebackers, and making plays on a weekly basis. I think Ryan Fitzmagic for the Washington football team is a fantastic sleeper option in many cases, but is very consistent. In terms of consistency over the last couple of years, he's within the top 10 quarterbacks in fantasy points per game since 2019. So overall, he's been a great quarterback play. We move on to the next quarterback option, Joe Burrow. The issue that I have with Joe Burrow, and the reason why I have him down here, despite the fact that he should be able to throw for a lot of yards this season, is his strength of schedule and his potential health. Again, coming back from that injury is going to be difficult. It's going to take a little while until you feel 100%, and I don't think he'll probably be there until he's fully putting it to the test, 150%, using every single ounce of effort in his body. But either way, in terms of his potential upside, he's got an incredible wide receiver core. His running back talent, I mean, look, I know a lot of you guys don't like Mixon, but Mixon out of the backfield as a receiving option is not bad at all. You've got the talent that surrounds him. Offensive line has improved. I think as a whole, it's just a matter of whether or not Joe Burrow is going to take that next step and accomplish things that we, saw kind of glimpses of in his rookie season, but take the next level and get into this top 15 quarterback conversation in fantasy football. I think it only takes a couple weeks, and eventually we start to see him really put up some good numbers here for us in 2021. We move on to Trevor Lawrence. So here's the thing about Trevor Lawrence. In fantasy football, the only time that we've ever seen a quarterback finish as a QB1 in their rookie season in the past decade is if they played and started all games in a singular season. So we're going to need Trevor Lawrence to play 16, 17 games this year in order to be a QB1. Now, is he capable of doing that? I'm not sure what this Urban Meyer, Darrell Bevell offense is going to look like. I know that the offensive pieces there, DJ Chark, Marvin Jones Jr., Laviska Shenault, James Robinson, they look good. We've got, a decent team there. The offensive line could be better, but ultimately, we've seen this team even win games under, the starting quarterback play of Gardner Minshew. We've seen that over the last couple of years, and we haven't been surprised. So I think Trevor Lawrence, if he is as good as people say he is, and he's going to take that next step, can very easily be a weekly starting quarterback after he kind of gains a little bit of experience under his belt in good matchups. But as a whole, I don't expect him to get into this 30 passing touchdown conversation unless he really is that next level of quarterback that I'm underestimating him, perhaps. All right, we move on to Derek Carr. Derek Carr is coming off of, in my opinion, a career year. Though he's had better seasons in the past, Derek Carr finishes the number 13 overall quarterback with 27 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, and 4,100 passing yards. Obviously, thank you, Darren Waller, for helping you accomplish that. But Derek Carr has kind of improved and went from being like a mid-range QB2 from that 17 to 19 range in terms of overall rankings to being in the kind of upper end. But with that being said, I don't know what we can expect from Derek Carr. The offensive line has been retooled. Yes, you brought in some talent in Kenyon Drake. Maybe he's going to siphon some touchdowns here and there. I'm not too convinced with this wide receiver core. I know Darren Waller's, for sure there, but, Bryan Edwards, Henry Ruggs, John Brown, if those 3 guys are enough for Derek Carr to produce, then we're on a good page. But they really haven't surrounded him with much elite level talent. And that, in my opinion, kind of takes away from the potential of Derek Carr and kind of scares me unless he's in a fantastic matchup. Because, again, even in some of these games that he's played, he'll come out and they'll win by 30 points against the Denver Broncos, but he didn't score a touchdown because this is a run-first offense. And that is what hurts Derek Carr the most. And yes, every now and then he'll throw for 2 or 3 touchdowns, but every now and then he'll also score 0 or 1, and he'll end up burning you. And that inconsistency leaves him in this tier. We move to Tua Tongaviloa. So here's the thing. If, in fact, he's fully healthy and you have Will Fuller, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, and Myles Gaskin on the field all at the same time, Tua could very easily be in this E or D tier of quarterback. He could very easily elevate himself to that next level. But my issues are, is he going to have a fully healthy wide receiver core surrounding him? Or are we going to have a similar look to last season in which we're watching Tua Tagovailoa throw the ball to Jakeem Grant on Sundays? Like, I don't want to see these kind of things. And hopefully we don't end up seeing that. So if this offensive line can protect this young man, the wide receiver core stay healthy, their defense is going to ball out and give them opportunities to stay in games, I think Tua can be a decent quarterback, but I'm not expecting him to improve head over heels this upcoming season. We have Baker Mayfield as the next option here. Baker has the easiest schedule, I think, amongst all quarterbacks this season. The Cleveland Browns are going to be in a very advantageous situation. You get Odell Beckham back. I think, the chemistry that he's built with Austin Hooper thus far, Jarvis Landry, Kareem Hunt out of the backfield is fantastic. You got the best offensive line in the National Football League in front of you. That's great. But it's a run-first offense. And Baker Mayfield's the second option, maybe even the third option in this offense, because they want to run the ball and they do it so successfully. And that in itself kind of worries me. And yes, he has found himself a lot of success over the years. In fact, even just last year from weeks 13 through 17, he was the number 8 overall quarterback in terms of total fantasy points scored. So he found himself a rhythm at the back end of last year that maybe he can continue on this upcoming season. But at this current moment in time, unless I'm drafting him as my second quarterback, I'm not really looking to reach for him and make him my QB1. I think that's too much of a risk at this moment. Justin Fields, the next quarterback in this, kind of division here as the F tier. As of right now, we're waiting for Andy Dalton to make a mistake. And it honestly could just be week 1 Sunday Night Football against the Los Angeles Rams. You come to LA, you get smacked up, you throw some interceptions. Here comes Justin Fields. They just need an excuse to bench Andy Dalton. That's it. That's all they need. Matt Nagy just needs one excuse. And once it's given, Justin Fields running away with his job. And to be honest, could even be a more influential quarterback because of his rushing ability in comparison to the other quarterbacks I've mentioned prior to him. He has got the upside of rushing yards. And if he can put together a season in which he's getting 500 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, getting up there to the 20 touchdown mark, then we can get into a conversation of him even potentially vying for a top 15 quarterback ranking this year. The last quarterback I wanted to mention is Trey Lance, because though I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to play a lot more games than a lot of people anticipate, if in fact Trey Lance somehow, some way is given the job because Jimmy Garoppolo has not stayed healthy in his career thus far, Trey Lance could very easily take this quarterback job and look like how Colin Kaepernick did a couple years back with Alex Smith. Out of nowhere, the quarterback change happens, and because of how solidified this offense is that surrounds whatever the quarterback position is, with Kittle, Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, one of the better offensive lines, you've got the best fullback in the game with Kyle Juszczyk, and of course, Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon. I think we can see a lot of success out of this rookie quarterback. Just a matter of time until he's given the spotlight. We have Sam Darnold beginning the G tier. Hopefully this doesn't come off as disrespectful, because I really do think that Sam Darnold is going to improve this year. I think he's going to have a fantastic year in comparison to seasons prior. I don't expect him to be a world beater. I don't think this Carolina Panthers offense is going to be one of the best in the National Football League. Sure, they're going to have games in which they score 3+ touchdowns because of the efforts of Sam Darnold. But that being said, I don't really automatically assume Sam Darnold to be the next level of quarterback that's going to, change my mind and think, now that he's with Carolina, he's going to be a fantastic. I mean, he's got to have to prove it. That's really what it is. He's got to prove to us that he's capable of it and kind of deserves to be drafted and played on a weekly basis in fantasy. Carson Wentz is another option. Here's the thing. Carson Wentz and this Indianapolis Colts offense run first. Yep, similar to a lot of these other guys. But the issue that I have is that there's not a clear solidified wide receiver one. It should be Michael Pittman, but he may have an injury. T.Y. Hilton's getting older. I don't know why they even re-signed him. That wasn't really the greatest idea. They don't have a stud tight end, even though they used tight end, in a rotation. They've used like 3 or 4 over the last couple of years on a consistent basis. I just think that similar to Sam Darnold, Carson Wentz has to prove to us that he's no longer broken. He was broken. Like he could not do anything for that Philadelphia Eagles offense last year, and it was embarrassing to see at times just how bad he was, throwing interception after interception. He's going to have to prove to us that he's kind of past those days. And until then, he'll stay here in the G tier. Speaking of another quarterback that needs to prove it to us, we're watching Jameis Winston take the starting role of the New Orleans Saints, and the question remains, can he get past his days of throwing 30-plus interceptions? Because it won't ever get there, but in the same vein, if it gets to that point where he's throwing interceptions, unfortunately, he has another gentleman breathing down his neck, ready to take his job by the name of Taysom Hill. So Jameis Winston, you're another quarterback that I'm not too convinced on. 3 of these quarterbacks that haven't proven anything to me, or if in fact proven that they are not to be trusted, that is why they sit here in the G tier. Okay, we move on to Daniel Jones in the H tier. Daniel Jones. This organization hasn't really given him the greatest amount of opportunity. Yes, they're bringing, Kenny Galladay this offseason, but offensive line-wise, they haven't done their job. They do have Evan Ingram. They brought in Kyle Rudolph. You still have Slayton, Shepard, Saquon. You've got talent. Okay, but is it enough for this quarterback to take it to the next level? I think it's a matter of whether or not they're able to run the ball. If Saquon's there and they're effectively running the ball, then the play action will help open this up for Daniel Jones. He has the ability to run the ball himself. Over the last couple of years has shown that very easily. Unfortunately, tripping on live television Thursday Night Football when he's going to run for an 80-yard touchdown instead of fall 60 yards into it. Regardless, Daniel Jones has the potential. It's just a matter of whether the offense surrounding him is going to help him get there. It's going to be tough. Zach Wilson, despite how well he's looked in the preseason, he's a Jets quarterback. And the Jets, the Jets. They're an interesting bunch. I think it's going to be tough until I actually see him produce full speed against some top defenses, especially against, the Patriots, the Bills, even the Dolphins. He's got a lot of competition up ahead of him, a lot of good cornerbacks in that division of the AFC East. It's going to be tough. We move on to Jared Goff. Probably, in my opinion, look, it's tough to talk about Jared Goff. I already have a relationship that's pretty negative and toxic with Jared Goff. He's definitely done us in the last couple of years for the Los Angeles Rams. Here's the thing. He is sitting in the worst offense in the National Football League in terms of overall talent. And unfortunately, it's going to definitely show. Their running backs are decent. Their wide receivers are You got a good tight end. Their offense line's okay. But as a whole, as an entire equation, Jared Goff isn't going to really help them very much. It's going to be tough, to say the least. Teddy Bridgewater is another quarterback. Now, the reason why I mentioned Bridgewater in this H tier is because he's been given the starting position. Otherwise, I think he'll potentially be replaced soon enough, and we're going to see a lot of rotation of back and forth from Bridgewater to Locke until they kind of figure out what they're going to do. Unless Bridgewater is going to kind of solidify his role, but last year I wouldn't say he even won that role. He only had 15 passing touchdowns for the Carolina Panthers. He's going to have to do a lot more than that this year to maintain his job. Cam Newton's the last quarterback of this H tier because, again, I do expect him to start for a little while, but eventually then lose his job. And in the games that he is the starter, he's going to find some success. He's going to score touchdowns, get a lot of points off of the rushing game. His shoulder should be fully healthy, be able to uncork a couple bombs here and there. But the last quarterback tier I want to mention, the I tier, is quarterbacks that are either going to be in a rotation on the yearly basis or replaced. Jimmy G will start the beginning of the season because, again, you want to throw Jimmy G out there and then have a reason to replace him with Trey Lance. Same thing with Cam. You want to throw Cam out there, replace him with Mac Jones, Justin Fields with Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater with Drew Lock, Taysom Hill with Jameis Winston, and then Tyrod Taylor, the odd man out. We don't know what's happening with Deshaun, but Tyrod Taylor, good luck, my guy. It's going to be tough for you this season. Certainly going to be a rough start for the Houston Texans. All right, that's my quarterback tier list for the 2021 fantasy football season. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I appreciate you guys tagging along, watching today's video, enjoying the content. Of course, subscribing, liking down below, and commenting. Thank you very much for the support. Again, don't forget, down in the description, Andrew Kirchhoff's 2021 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now available for those of you who are interested. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Click that subscribe button. And until next time, tomorrow, tight ends. I'll see you guys. Peace.